Hi, everybody. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Steve. I see you're out of FB jail or wherever else you are. Hi, Kay. Did I say hi, Kay, already? If so, say hi again. And congrats for getting your J&J shot today. Okay, now, to feel safe with it, I think you need something like, 24 days, 28 days after the shot? You still got to be careful, Kay. Still got to be careful. So, tonight's topic is climate emergency, Manchin / filibuster, and reconciliation. So I just wanted to cover some events that were going on in the climate area, which seem to be noteworthy or important. So I'll do that in a few articles. Then I'll get to talking about Joe Manchin and his threats and the filibuster again, and get into how the progressives have to counter that stuff, how I think they have to counter that stuff. And then I will get to reconciliation, of course, because I need to cover that in a little more detail. I think it's not so clear to people, and there may in fact be questions about exactly how many reconciliation bills it will be possible for the Democrats to pass. That's an important question to take up. And that's going to be the last one I want to take up tonight. Hey, Lana. Okay, says so far, no effects from it. They told me 2 weeks, Joe. They said you'd have the full protection afforded by the vaccine within 2 weeks. Well, if I were you, I'd do some research on that, Kay. I think maybe it may take just a little longer than that. Carmen says, back from my fascist book protest. However, I was still sharing and inviting every night. Thank you, Carmen. And Kay said, yep. Yeah, I did notice you sharing and inviting. And I wondered where you were also. Anyway, let's get to the climate-related stuff. Hi there, Evelina. Nice to see you. Coalition calls for, quote, building a fairer, healthier world, unquote, through climate action. It's from Common Dreams on April 7th, and it's Jessica Corbett. Little sign, be the heroes our planet needs. And this one's about the Global Climate and Health Alliance, marking World Health Day on Wednesday, with a call for governments to learn from the coronavirus pandemic and make health policies a central part of climate commitments, and action. I think that's really pretty significant because we certainly have seen the intersection of climate and health problems in the person, if I can use that term, of the coronavirus pandemic. Jessica says, faced with a quote, with a world in disarray, unquote, from over 2.87 million global COVID-19 cases and 556,500 deaths to rising atmospheric carbon, and inadequate emissions reduction plans, an international coalition on Wednesday urged world leaders to learn from the coronavirus pandemic and, quote, make health the central focus of national climate policies, unquote. That call from the Global Climate and Health Alliance, GCHA, a coalition of 70 health professional and civil society groups, came as the World Health Organization, WHO, and governments across the globe marked World Health Day. This year's theme, set by the United Nations agency, is, quote, building a fairer, healthier world, unquote, for, quote again, everyone, everywhere, unquote. Specifically, GCHA demanded emissions reduction targets that align with the 2015 Paris Agreement, which aims to limit global temperature rise this century to, quote, well below, unquote, 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. Of course, I think that's too soft. I think it definitely has to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or we are in serious trouble. Anyway, demanded emissions reduction targets that align with 2015 agreement in nationally determined contributions, NDC, which governments are updating ahead of a November summit. Coalition also advocated for ensuring that climate commitments and actions include measures to reduce greenhouse gas, that is GHG, emissions that mitigate climate change, maximize health benefits such as by improving air quality, calculating associated health cost savings, and adaptation strategies incorporating health and investments in resilient healthcare and public health systems. GCHA added that within and beyond NDCs, of the nationally determined contributions, that is, COVID-19 recovery investments must align with healthy national climate action commitments to protect people, the planet, and economies, securing a healthy and sustainable future, unquote. Jenny Miller, the coalition's executive director, warned that, quote, with countries who make up 70% of global emissions yet to go public with updates to their national climate commitments, there's a massive opportunity for governments to escalate climate ambition. The alternative is to risk endangering the health of the people and the planet on which we all depend. Jenny Miller tweeted, our health, climate environment, our economies, and social equity are fundamentally intertwined. The stable and ongoing global recovery will require ambitious national climate plans, and a healthy and sustainable future requires health be in those plans. In the United States, seems to me Medicare for all had better be in those plans. Are you listening, Joe Biden? Probably not. There's a lady holding up a sign saying, need fresh air in Bangkok. That was the Bangkok air pollution protest in 2020. 2019 pandemic has taught us that health must be part and parcel of every government policy. And as recovery plans are drawn up, this must apply to climate policy, unquote. And quote again, Miller said, or I should say Miller said, quote again, healthy populations are a prerequisite for economic recovery, and strong health systems are essential to increase resilience to future crises, such as changing infectious disease patterns and extreme weather events, unquote. The pandemic has led public health and wildlife experts around the world to emphatically encourage bold action to not only limit global heating, but also to, quote, reduce the risk of future pandemics and heal our broken relationship with nature, unquote. As a worldwide fund for nature, the WWF report put it last year. A quote again from Jenny Miller, both health systems and economies must be bolstered in preparation for the health burden that is expected to result from rapidly rising temperatures and extreme weather events, unquote. And there's more in this vein in this article. There's a tweet, okay, from IFMSA. I must say I'm not certain at this point what that stands for. International Federation of Medical Students Associations is what it stands for. The medical students worldwide support at Jenny Miller critical call on governments to integrate #health in the nationally determined contributions, and that GCH Alliance plans for a scorecard to review the progress of countries on the submission and implementation of healthy national determinate contributions for people and the planet. And that's a retweet of a tweet by the Global Climate and Health Alliance, quoting Jenny Miller, is calling on government to commit to ambitious #climate action, #COP26, to maximize #health benefits, #healthy NDCs, #equality, to climate smart public #healthcare, and to post #COVID-19 measures aligned with #NDCs, and a link to the full post on that, I guess, from the Global Climate and Health Alliance. And Miller also recognized the economic impact of the pandemic and what the crisis has revealed about the existing the global system. And then there's a quote relating economic fragility to the need to mitigate climate change. And the less we mitigate climate change effects and protect health, the more our fragility economically will make us all suffer. And she calls for a greater degree of economic equity, which of course we all need. Miller's comments preceded the release of a new study of health professionals' perspectives on climate change in the Lancet Planetary Health, which is a publication, of the Lancet, I believe, a special report. According to the coalition, the study finds that a majority of survey respondents believe the health community should have a say in pushing for national policies that will protect health by meeting the targets of the Paris Agreement. Of course, I join with others in thinking that the Paris Agreement is much too optimistic and also much too conservative in its targets, and that we're going to have policies that do better at surpassing the targets of the Paris Agreement. So next, to continue with the international perspective here, we move to Brazil. Where Common Dreams ran an article on Bolsonaro, a quote, threat to the planet. It says Lula, as Brazil's daily COVID death toll hits an all-time high. This was on April 7th. It's by Jake Johnson. There's a sign, Rio de Janeiro, 3714. Bolsonaro, genocida. And a sign that is saying Amapa 1311. And I'm not sure what the last sign is reading. This was protest against President Jair Bolsonaro's coronavirus response in Brazil on April 2nd, 2021. Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Wednesday called far-right President Jair Bolsonaro a grave, quote, threat to the planet, unquote. After the nation's daily COVID-19 death toll topped 4,000 for the first time since the pandemic began last year. By the way, that's sort of the equivalent of more than 6,000 here. Okay, that's a sign the public health crisis is worsening as Bolsonaro continues to downplay the virus and undercut potential solutions. At least 4,195 Brazilians died of the coronavirus on Tuesday. Nearly 87,000 new infections were reported as the South American country's treatment facilities was, quote, stretched to breaking point by the rapidly spreading virus. Quote, it's a nuclear reactor that has set off a chain reaction and is out of control, unquote. Said Miguel Nicolelis, a Brazilian doctor and professor at Duke University in the United States. He said to The Guardian, of the worsening COVID-19 crisis in Brazil, which has the second highest COVID-19 death toll in the world behind the US. He said, it's a biological Fukushima, said Nicolelis. With deaths and cases surging, Bolsonaro has persistently refused to consider implementing public safety measures to slow the spread and remain committed to dismissing the severity of the pandemic, which he has previously characterized as a media creation. Sound familiar? In an open letter published Wednesday, Lula, who was expected to mount another presidential bid, wrote that, quote, unfortunately, our country is today considered a global threat due to the uncontrolled circulation of the virus and the emergence of new mutations, unquote. I think Brazil is also considered a global threat because of all the burning in the Amazon and the continuing destruction of the Amazon, which gets more and more serious each year and has really accelerated under Bolsonaro. If Lula does get to be president, he's going to have to put a stop to that real quick, because that's the other threat to the planet from the Brazilian government. Quote, it must be said that this threat to the planet has a name and a surname, said Lula on Jair Bolsonaro, a president of the republic who systematically denies science and who ignores the suffering of the people he is sworn to defend, unquote. The former president went on to stress the need for equitable and swift global distribution of the coronavirus vaccine, echoing scientists' warnings that leaving much of the world unprotected dramatically increases the risk of vaccine resistance by mutations emerging, spreading around the world, rendering first-generation vaccines ineffective. Quote, we cannot consider living in a world where part of the planet is vaccinated and part abandoned and isolated to be a free field, before mutations of the virus, unquote. Quote again from Lula. The epicenter of the pandemic cannot be Europe yesterday, today Brazil, tomorrow Africa, with new variants restarting the cycle of death and sadness around the world. But, quote, instead of defending, instead of defending, instead of defending immunizations as a public good for humanity, the Bolsonaro government advocates the private commercialization of vaccines and their concentration in a few companies and countries, unquote. And of course, it has to be pointed out that Joe Biden has still not taken up the patents of our commercial drug companies, okay, and allowed the recipes for producing the vaccines to be circulated to the whole world. That is absolutely necessary, or we will have the crisis that Lula, okay, is talking about. And people in this country have been calling on Biden and have been saying the same thing to him as Lula wrote, speaking of his country and the actions of Jair Bolsonaro. As The Intercept reported Wednesday, Bolsonaro has repeatedly undermined Brazil's public vaccination system, widely considered one of the best in the world prior to the COVID-19 crisis. That's really amazing to realize that it was widely regarded as one of the best in the world, and Bolsonaro ruined it. And is currently supporting an effort by right-wing lawmakers to, quote, allow corporations to directly purchase vaccine doses from international suppliers and give them to employees even before priority groups like the elderly and medical workers are fully vaccinated. Under Bolsonaro's leadership, Brazil has also joined the United States, Canada, and European nations in opposing a South Africa and India-led effort at the World Trade Organization to temporarily suspend vaccine-related patent protections. Quote, the real tragedy is that Brazil is among the few vaccine manufacturing countries in the world blessed with world-class vaccine research and production facilities, unquote. Actual Prapala of Accessibsa, an international project focused expanding access to medicines and vaccines, said to The Intercept, quote again, if there had been a coordinated federal strategy early on to support the local production of vaccines, Brazil would have been in a very different situation today. And yes, indeed, of course it would. And we would probably be in one too, because after all, the Brazilian variant has now spread here. It's not the dominant variant here, it's the UK variant here. But we don't know what's going to become of it as it spreads. We believe the vaccines will stop it at this point. Let's hope that's true. The vaccines appear to be effective against the South African variant. And that is, of course, a hopeful sign and important. Next, we have some good news. A remarkable story of resilience and hope. Renewable energy smashes records in 2020. This is a post from April 5th, Common Dreams. Kenny Stansel is the staff writer. There's a picture of a wind farm, a view of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's Pine Tree Wind Farm and solar power plant in the Tehachapi Mountains on March 23rd, 2021 in Kern County, California. Despite the difficulties associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, the world added a record amount of new renewable energy capacity in 2020, according to data released Monday by the International Renewable Energy Agency. IRENA's Annual Renewable Capacity Statistics 2021 shows that global renewable energy capacity grew by more than 260 gigawatts last year, beating the previous record set in 2019 by nearly 50%. Very impressive. Last year marked the second consecutive year in which clean energy's share of all new generating capacity increased substantially, with renewables accounting for over 80% of all new electricity capacity added in 2020. Total fossil fuel additions, by contrast, fell by more than 6% last year, from 64 gigawatts worth of new electricity capacity in 2019 to 60 gigawatts in 2020. Quote, "These numbers tell a remarkable story of resilience and hope. Despite the challenges and the uncertainty of 2020, renewable energy emerged as a source of undeniable optimism for a better, more equitable, resilient, clean, and just future," unquote. IRENA Director General Francisco La Camara said in a statement, quote, "The great, I reset, it's actually Director General Francesco La Camara, quote, "The great reset," unquote, as he called the coronavirus-driven economic slowdown, quote again, "offered a moment of reflection and chance to align our trajectory with the path to inclusive prosperity. There are signs we are grasping it." Referring to 2020 as, quote, "the start of the decade of renewables," La Camara noted that, quote, "costs are falling, clean tech markets are growing, and never before have the benefits of the energy transition been so clear," unquote. Though hydropower, responsible for more than 43% of the world's total renewable energy generation capacity, still constitutes the largest global source of clean energy, other sources are catching up. Solar and wind contributed 127 gigawatts and 111 gigawatts of new installations, respectively, together accounting for 90% of the renewables growth in 2020. While Francesco La Camara described the widespread adoption of renewable energy sources as an, quote, "unstoppable," unquote, trend, he also emphasized that, quote, "there is a huge amount to be done." Notwithstanding the recent increase in the momentum In favor of clean energy, La Camera said that in order to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, quote, significant planned energy investments must be redirected to support the transition if we're to achieve 2050 goals, unquote, of net zero greenhouse gas emissions, as outlined last month in IRENA's World Energy Transition Outlook. And there's a link in the article to the report. I've said before, I'll say again, the 2050 goals aren't sufficient. We have to do this way before 2050, okay, if we're going to survive. We've got to have a net zero long before 2050. Long before, maybe 2050, 2035, perhaps even 2030. La Camera's words of caution about the inadequate pace of the global energy transformation echoes a recent warning by Fatih Birol, executive director of the International Energy Agency, the IEA, who said last week that even though the world's biggest economies have pledged to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century, few have implemented the policies necessary to realize that goal. Regarding the worldwide expansion of renewable energy capacity in 2020, La Camera stressed that, quote, in this critical decade of action, the international community must look to this trend as a source of inspiration to go further. So that's the bit, okay, of good news that we have on the climate front. And now, let's check out this article from the American Prospect, not by Dave Dayen this time, but by Gabrielle Gurley. Charging stations could drive electric vehicles into a wall. I've been holding on to this, meaning to hit it since April 2nd, but haven't had a chance. It was done on April 2nd. And there's a car, specifically a Toyota Prius, connected to an electric vehicle charging station in a Washington, D.C. parking garage in March of 2021. In 9 years, gas stations will be obsolete if all goes according to President Biden's American Jobs Plan. One of the most closely watched, if thin on details provisions, sketches the parameters of the administration's electric vehicle initiative, which calls for 500,000 charging stations across America by 2030. Therein lies a major problem. To be sure, prices are declining, and the used electric vehicle market is picking up, but the challenges posed by charging stations' access and the amount of time to charge an electric vehicle, anywhere from roughly half an hour to top up fast charging models to around 5 hours or more for slower charges, could make or break the EV rollout. Yeah, the EV charging stations had better be right in front of a coffee shop if it's going to take a half hour to charge them.
We know where one is.
Yeah, we know where one is. It's not far from our favorite coffee shop. EV first adopters have charging figured out, but average drivers considering EVs will balk at having to enroll in different charging station networks to get going, especially since they're hardwired to the existing gas station culture of getting in and getting out as quickly as possible, and are long accustomed to their ability to fill up at an Exxon or Chevron or any station that's nearby. Equity issues also have reared up. I guess the image there is that equity issues are like a horse, they rear up. Today, there are only about 42,000 charging stations and 101,000 charging outlets. So, wow. Wealthier, whiter neighborhoods have more charging stations than any place else, making range anxiety and charging deserts a valid concern for everyone else. The Biden plan tackles the problems posed by range anxiety, but picking up the pace of widespread adoption will hinge on setting charging station standards. Right now, the American electric vehicle landscape is pockmarked by a couple dozen different charging station networks, each offering a range of coverage options. Tesla has the most extensive network, with thousands of the fastest charging stations available across North America and beyond. But if you don't own a Tesla, you'll have to drive right by those Tesla charging stations. If a driver doesn't charge at home, which can take hours, or needs to charge up on the road, she'll have to search for public chargers. Conversely, Tesla drivers have adapters that allow them to use other charging networks. Well, if they spend that kind of money for a car, I suppose it's got to have some advantages. Just this week, in a bid to take on Tesla, EV manufacturer by Rivian, I never heard of that manufacturer of electric vehicles. Isn't that interesting? Announced its plans to create a network of charging stations exclusive to Rivian owners and set up a separate, larger public charging network. As Vice senior writer Aaron Gordon notes in his deep dive on the EV charging conundrum, the obsession with exclusivity and proprietary features is the gathering storm looming over the Biden plan, one that could stall the green automotive revolution. It's Herbert Hoover, of all people, who offers a blueprint for success. Before he became the president, undone by the Great Depression, Hoover was an enterprising Secretary of Commerce in the 1920s, promoting the then revolutionary idea of product standardization, with the goal to reduce waste and inefficiency in American industry. He persuaded companies to adopt uniform standards for consumer products. So beginning 100 years ago, the 78 different sizes of mattresses and bed frames were reduced to 4. Types of bricks from 66 to 11, and milk bottles from 49 to 9. I think that accomplishment may be more than Herbert Hoover ever did as President of the United States. I couldn't pass that by. It's a little too rough on Hoover. Hoover did create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in response to the presidency. Okay, a creation that was very effectively used by Franklin Roosevelt in helping to overcome the Depression. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was instrumental in getting that done and is still studied here today. So Hoover did do at least really one great thing, okay, as president. Hoover had a wonderful career, by the way, until he became the president of the United States and happened to be the president when the Depression occurred. The electric vehicle component of Biden's multi-trillion-dollar proposal constitutes a mammoth standalone program, a $174 billion package that includes $160 billion for job training, retooling factories, and fleet electrification, with $25 billion to mass transit and $20 billion to school buses, and another $14 billion in tax credits and incentives. That's too much money to sprinkle on a universe of companies with the hope that they can sort out the tech. They can sort out the tech themselves, amongst themselves. At the same time, rolling out a complex regulatory network in a backdoor effort to compel standards won't win friends or influence people either. Quote, I can't see the federal government funding 5 different networks of different kinds of charging stations. It seems inefficient to me, unquote, says Jeff Davis, a senior fellow with the ENO Center for Transportation, a Washington-based think tank. Quote, we need some serious top-down leadership to get all the manufacturers in the room and try to encourage standardization of EV outlets and systems wherever possible. What the EV charging infrastructure ultimately looks like hinges on the developing federal-state relations with EV manufacturers, whether they come along willingly on setting standards, or whether the charging status quo persists. According to Davis, auto manufacturers would likely prefer some federal direction on the question of aligning technologies rather than having to engage in competitive battles over charging networks. That is, except for the EV industry leader, who has so far set the pace and won't want to be hemmed in by federal dictates. Quote, it's a Tesla versus everybody else situation, says Davis. And quote again, as popular as Elon Musk is, I suspect that the political power of all the other manufacturers in the United States is going to be more than his, unquote. Last year, when Ford announced its plans to pump billions into EVs and autonomous vehicles, a decision signaled the auto industry's acceptance that the electrification was the path to net zero emissions and the last opportunity to avoid climate catastrophe. In January, General Motors disclosed that it will end production of fossil fuel-powered vehicles by 2035. How the industry and the Biden administration confront charging standards will spell the difference between a successful transition and a possible Who Killed the Electric Car 2, a sequel no one wants to see. And just to note, this article is part of the American Prospect's ongoing series on sustainable mobility, transportation, and the climate. Certainly an ongoing series we're going to keep our eyes on here. So that's the climate emergency news part of this stream. I want to move now to the latest from Joe Manchin, keeping his name in the headlines as best he can, evidently. This too is from Common Dreams, and it's another piece by Jake Johnson from today, April 8th. Quote, why the Senate is so broken, unquote. Manchin vow to preserve filibuster, imperils voting rights, and much more. And there's a picture of Joe wearing what looks like, to me, a $6,000 blazer. But I'm no judge of $6,000 blazers. For all I know about them, he could be wearing a Costco special. Anyway, Senator Joe Manchin wears a protective mask as he departs the U.S. Capitol on September 21st, 2020. Or at least he was masked. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia late Wednesday reiterated his opposition to abolishing or even weakening the 60-vote legislative filibuster, a stance that could imperil his party's hopes of passing popular legislation to protect voting rights, reform the inhumane U.S. immigration system, raise the federal minimum wage, and more. In an op-ed for the Washington Post, Manchin described the archaic Senate rule as a, quote, critical tool, unquote, to uphold, quote, our democratic form of government, unquote, and declared that there is no circumstance in which I will vote to eliminate or weaken the filibuster, unquote. Joe Manchin's characterization of the 60-vote threshold runs directly counter to the argument from the progressives and the growing number of conservative Democrats that the rule threatens democracy by giving the minority party inordinate power to tank bills supported by a majority of members of Congress and broad swaths of the U.S. Public. In a narrowly divided Senate, the existence of the filibuster in its current form also gives lone senators like Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, another strident defender of the filibuster, significant leverage to influence the legislation. Quote, Joe Manchin represents a state that is 1/22nd the population of California and 92% white. Yet he can single-handedly block policies supported by 70 to 80% of Americans, unquote, noted Ari Berman of Mother Jones. Quote again, this is why the U.S. Senate is so broken, unquote. I would add, this is why the U.S. government is so broken. If the Senate is so broken, then what happens is the legislation that helps people cannot be passed. And the problems of our polity and of our economy and of our society mount up year after year after year. And those problems cannot be solved because we cannot even pass enough legislation to try out different things and find out what works. We can't adapt. How did the New Deal become successful? The New Deal became successful because Franklin Roosevelt passed a whole bunch of different things. Lots of things failed, but he kept throwing things against the wall until they stuck. Eventually, they stuck, and it happened. That's what he did. He experimented. He was great at experimentation. He was the supreme pragmatist. We cannot have people playing the supreme pragmatist anymore. simply because we don't have the majorities in the Senate that are needed to overcome the freaking filibuster, especially not the way it operates now. So it's either get rid of the filibuster or we ain't adapting. It's not a matter of why the U.S. Senate is so broken. It's a matter of why the United States is so broken. And you can talk all you want about the donors and that the filibuster isn't actually the problem. It's the donors and this and that. Look, we got a lot of problems, and the donors are a very big problem. But we cannot get at the donors as long as the filibuster is there. We got to do everything we can to break the dike at the filibuster point. Then we can go after the donors. But Manchin claimed in his op-ed that there is, quote, bipartisan support, unquote, for many of the Democratic Party's top priorities, including infrastructure investments and some of the voting rights reforms proposed in the For the People Act, and expressed skepticism about using the filibuster-proof reconciliation process to pass major spending bills without needing Republican support. So what's Manchin against? He's against taxing the rich, taxing the corporates to strengthen our democracy. He's against deficit spending, even though he doesn't want to tax them. He insists taxes be increased to pay for things, but he doesn't want those taxes when Biden proposes those taxes. So what he's really saying is that he doesn't want anything to be done before the people. And to make sure that doesn't happen, he's against the filibuster, and he doesn't even want to use the reconciliation process to pass major spending bills because he doesn't think things should be passed through the Congress without Republican support. And then Republicans and Mitch McConnell on the other side is saying, we're not going to pass anything that's going to look good for Joe Biden and the Democrats. So this is what's going to happen with Mitch. How serious is Mitch? I mean, right now, anything you suggest, it's Mr. Catch-22. No, 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 no. He's playing Catch-22. Well, how about this? No. How about that? No. How about the other thing? No. How about that? No. So how long is he going to keep this up? How long is he going to keep this up? Adam Gentleson said, the former Senate staffer and outspoken advocate of filibuster reform, who wrote a book on the subject, is saying Manchin is setting himself up to be Mr. Gridlock. I prefer Mr. Catch-22. Quote, he's putting himself on the hook to deliver 10 GOP votes on everything. When he fails, as he will, he'll be the one blocking broadly popular policies that improve people's lives and which Dems must pass to hold the majority in 2022. That's right. But more importantly, by being Mr. Catch-22, he's preventing legislation from passing that can begin our adaptation to the climate emergency. He's preventing the breakup of gridlock in the Senate, which is blocking us safeguarding the voting rights of Americans. So he's contributing to the destruction of democracy, because there's nothing so central to democracy as voting rights, but he doesn't seem to believe that. And then he's stopping us from adapting to climate change, the climate emergency as well. I mean, not to mention what he's doing in the healthcare area. He'll be the one broadly blocking popular policies, not just popular policies, but policies that are needed to meet the existential threat that we all face. So what Joe Manchin is doing is he is gambling with the future existence of not just the United States of America, but with the world, so he can safeguard his power position in the Congress. Now, I think as the months go by, it is going to become increasingly apparent that he is doing this. And the opprobrium and the pressure that he will face is going to bring the hammer of public opinion down on him. And it will be unrelenting. And remember, he has to keep doing this until early in 2022, because that's really the deadline for passing HR 1 and S1 and get those bills applied to the election of 2022. So he has to be the impossible person until that time. That's why I don't really think he's totally serious about this. He's negotiating in part. He's playing a real tough negotiation game. And meanwhile, he's blocking lots and lots of legislation we need. So how is that but to be faced? Ro Khanna has been tweeting that the reconciliation fix coming out of the parliamentarian, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, he tweeted that this is a temporary fix to a systemic issue. And quote from Ro again, "Enough with the procedural hurdles, just abolish the filibuster," he added, embracing a position backed by a growing number of Senate Democrats in recent weeks. Scrapping the filibuster would require the support of the entire Senate Democratic caucus, plus a tie-breaking vote from Vice President Harris. Why is Manchin so opposed to that? Because if the filibuster is no longer there and Republicans don't figure into the equation, then Sinema and Manchin are going to be the ones who are going to be blocking progress, and they won't be able to push off the pressure by talking about Republican opposition, because Republican opposition at that point will not count. Only their opposition will count. That's one reason why they're so against abolishing the filibuster. Jim Clyburn, the third highest ranking House Democrat, lashed out at Manchin over his position on the filibuster and the For the People Act, HR1 and S1, in an interview with HuffPost last week. Quote, "I'm insulted when he tells me it's more important to maintain a relationship with the minority in the U.S. Senate than it is for you to maintain a relationship with the minority of voters in America," Clyburn said. And quote again, "That's insulting to me," unquote. Quote again, "Since when do the minority party's rights take precedence over your fellow Democrat, Senator Warnock, who saw his state just pass laws to keep him from getting reelected," unquote. Clyburn continued, quote again, "And you're going to say it's more important for you to protect 50 Republicans in the Senate than for you to protect your fellow Democrat seat in Georgia? That's a bunch of crap," unquote, said Clyburn, showing that he can say something relevant and important upon occasion. Sahil Kapoor tweeted, "The partial list of Biden agenda items that are toast in the Senate if the filibuster remains: $15 an hour minimum wage, universal gun background checks, DREAM Act, For the People Act, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Affordable Care Act public option, screw that one. Equality Act, George Floyd police bill. He should have added Medicare for all. Sahul Kapar was being diplomatic. He didn't want to add the Medicare for all bill, but we do. While Manchin has refused to waver in his opposition to eliminating the filibuster, he recently voiced support for reviving the talking filibuster. Such a change would represent a dramatic break from the current no-show filibuster, which allows senators to obstruct about legislation by sending an email. The West Virginia Democrat did not mention that potential reform in his new op-ed at the Washington Post. Remember, folks, it's catch-22. It's catch-22. One week he'll say one thing, the next week he'll say another thing, and he'll keep slapping Biden and the Democrats around week after week after week until he gets what he wants. Maybe we need to find out what the hell it is he wants. The only problem is maybe he doesn't want anything except to destroy the Democratic Party. Maybe that's what he wants. If so, the best thing to do is to cast him out of the Democratic Party. If he wants to go over the Republicans, give up control of the Senate, and then run in 2022 on what Joe Manchin and the Republican Party are doing, kick him out of the Senate, get back the Senate at that point, and then ram everything through like there's no tomorrow, because there will be no tomorrow. The West Virginia Democrat did not mention that potential reform in his new op-ed. Ezra Levin, co-executive director of progressive advocacy group Indivisible, expressed hope Wednesday that despite his latest comments, Manchin can still be moved on the filibuster issue with sufficient organizing and pressure. Well, Indivisible has been running ads in West Virginia. He hasn't responded yet. And Corbin Trent has been running ads. Okay, in West Virginia, Manchin still hasn't responded. We need more ads, heavier ads, more money spent, okay, on ads. Quote, Manchin is right that democracy reforms have broad bipartisan support, just not in the Senate, Levin said. Quote again, ultimately, there's not much new in his op-ed. It's all talk until the vote is called. Like all politicians, he'll stick his finger in the wind, and it's up to us to change the weather, unquote. That's well stated. I do agree with that in great part, but also I think what has to be done is for the progressives to do the same thing. In other words, if progressive stuff that we consider essential, like the minimum wage, is not in these reconciliation bills, then we need to say no to the reconciliation bills. If Biden has progressives on one side refusing to pass the infrastructure bill, Manchin on the other side refusing to pass the infrastructure bill, and both Manchin and his group and the progressives holding cards, being able to block those bills, and I include progressives in the House. Progressives in the House have to stand up and say, if vital progressive initiatives are not included in these bills, we don't vote for them. And progressives have to take that stand in the House right now. And the bills they have to pass out of the House have to have progressive initiatives in them. And if Nancy Pelosi won't agree, she doesn't get passage of the bill. That's the way it has to stand. And if she still insists, vacate the chair motions have to be used against her. But the progressives have to use their power to insist that these bills contain progressive priorities. Those bills have to be passed out of the House, sent to the Senate. When the Senate writes the progressive priorities out of the bills, because Joe Manchin doesn't want to vote for them, and then those bills come out to the House, then the House has to kick back those bills with the progressive priorities in it back to the Senate and call for a conference committee directly in order to negotiate out those bills. And of course, if there's a negotiation, not everything we want is going to be passed. But we'll get to yes on some things. But we won't get to yes if we're not willing to say no. We have to focus the pressure on Manchin and on Kyrsten Sinema for standing in the way. They are too few compared to the Democrats in favor of these particular bills. They are a relative but few compared to the other Democrats who would like to see big bills passed because they know their fate in 2022 depends on the big bills. So if Biden is faced with a choice of crunching Sinema and Manchin, or crunching the much larger progressive groups in the House and the Senate, he's going to have to go after Manchin and Sinema. Now, right now, all he's doing is talking softly to bring Manchin over. That's not going to do. All that's going to do is lose progressives what we need in these bills. So, I agree with many other people, with many other people on the left, with David Sirota, with Jordan Chariton. It's up to the progressives to stand firm. But for the priorities we need, in these particular bills. That's why we elected the progressive congressman to the House. That's why we elected some relatively progressive people in the Senate who now are sitting in committee chairs. But Ron Wyden is sitting in a key committee chair. Bernie Sanders is sitting in a key committee chair. There are other progressives sitting in key committee chairs now. There are a lot of them quite senior in the Senate, in powerful positions in the Senate. They're not the flaming progressives, that exist in the House, except in one or two cases. But they're progressive enough to go big on infrastructure. They are. They are. They have to stand together. And they have to refuse to compromise. And they have to get Biden to exert the power of the presidency against Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And anybody else who doesn't like the big bills that Biden actually needs. So. And finally, there's this piece from Vox that I wanted to go over. I don't go to Vox too much, but they had a good piece on the details of the reconciliation bill that I think is specific enough about the details of what was decided, okay, on reconciliation, but to allow us to pick out some of the issues which may prove important here. So I'll go through the piece, which was written by Li Zhu, okay, and Ellen Nilsson on April 5th. And the headline is Senate Democrats can now officially pass more bills with 51 votes. Well, I don't know how official it is. It doesn't seem to me it's official until Harris and Biden are going to support a bill. But anyway, Senate Democrats just got some wonky procedural news that has pretty big implications for Joe Biden's agenda. I've talked about this before. The parliamentarian determined that Democrats would be able to do a third budget of the reconciliation bill this year, a massive development that gives lawmakers more room to pass legislation without Republican support. Okay, now I disagree with that for reasons I'll explain. Okay, let me just take it here. I don't agree with that framing, okay, because the Democrats would have been able to do actually 6 reconciliation bills this year if they had split out the spending part from the taxing part from the debt part. In other words, the 3 subjects, okay, of reconciliation that are allowed, okay, in these particular bills. You're allowed to have a separate bill for each, okay, for each of those. So to begin with, they could have had 3 bills if they passed them in the right way, in the best sequence, and they were important things to do. The third type of bill, which deals with debt, could have removed the debt limit in a single afternoon, gotten rid of the debt limit entirely. In fact, since that was not addressed in the COVID-19 reconciliation bill, it could have been addressed in a separate reconciliation bill right after that. Just repealing the debt limit law, so we don't have any more debt ceiling crises in the future. Getting rid of debt ceiling crises. That would have been immensely valuable and probably could have been done very, very rapidly if the Democrats had thought to do it. Somehow, when they get in power, they don't think they have to do it. That's really, really stupid. It's just buying problems up in the future. Okay. But anyway, so there could have been 3 bills for 2021 and 3 separate bills focused on fiscal year 2022. Now the parliamentarian is saying, okay, that since the first of the reconciliation bills that was spending and I believe some taxing, okay, as well, that there's still a possibility of having another bill like that passed in fiscal year 2021. And how would it be done? Well, the article says already Democrats had the ability to do 2 budget reconciliation bills, one focused on fiscal 2021 and one focused on fiscal 2022. And I just explained how those two could have been turned into 6 reconciliation bills. But anyway, to go on. Unlike most other bills, budget measures can pass with just 51 votes instead of 60, which means Democrats are able to usher through the legislation they want if all 50 members of their caucus are on board. Explained here with the American Rescue Plan, 50 Democrats were able to approve the $1.9 trillion package. Now, the parliamentarian has advised that a revised budget resolution may contain budget reconciliation instructions, said a spokesperson for Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in a statement. Quote, "This confirms the leader's interpretation of the Budget Act and allows Democrats additional tools to improve the lives, of Americans if Republican obstruction continues," unquote. With the new decision from the parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, Democrats can now do a third budget reconciliation bill, which means they can push through more ambitious measures as long as they are related to taxing and spending. Now, they missed here a little too. They should have said, as long as they're related to taxing and spending, and debt. The decision is based on McDonough's interpretation of Section 304 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which allows lawmakers to revise a budget resolution before the end of the fiscal year that it covers. So, given her decision, Democrats can now edit the 2021 resolution they already passed and include instructions for another bill. That's the key point, that you can revise the instructions to go beyond what was covered in the COVID-19 bill. In other words, you amend the resolution to include infrastructure, which wasn't covered in the COVID-19 bill. And then you could pass another bill to implement that, and it would be consistent with the resolution that sets the framework for reconciliation bills. Now, there's an ambiguity here. The ambiguity here is there's no ruling on whether there can be more than one amendment to a resolution. In other words, let's say that in April, the Democrats come together and they edit the original 2021 resolution to include what they want to pass in the infrastructure bill, that's coming up. Then they come back in July and they want to amend the 2021 budget resolution a second time. Why can't they do that? I don't see anything in the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 that says they can't do that. And with each amendment, there is the possibility of another 3 reconciliation bills being considered. In other words, one for spending, one for taxing, and one for debt. Yep. So, from where I sit, they could come back, in July. If they want to, they could come back again in September if they want to pass some things, in a rush. Question I'm raising is, we don't know how many times in a fiscal year they can come back and further amend, a resolution that they passed in the early part of the fiscal year to trigger a new round of reconciliation bills. I don't think there are any limits in the Budget Act of 1974 as to how many rounds there can be. Schumer's spokesman also noted no decisions have been made on a legislative path forward using Section 304, and some of the parameters still need to be worked out. But budget reconciliation has its limits. It can't be used for policies like voting rights reforms or gun control, but it's still a helpful tool that Democrats have already leveraged to pass a huge expansion of the child tax credit. Yeah, there's the tax part that was in the first of the reconciliation bills. Enhanced unemployment aid, okay, and another round of stimulus checks. Democrats now have another opportunity to advance parts of their agenda that Republicans would otherwise block. But by the way, in a second round, okay, of reconciliation, they could pass the Automatic Booster Communities Act. They could pass the Jayapal Tlaib bill included in the reconciliation bill. It's a frickin' spending bill. Okay, it puts in a way of, quote, paying for things. The $1 trillion coin, okay, is in it, but okay, it doesn't relate to the topic of taxes, because that's not about taxing. It's about spending, okay, and getting revenue some other way, okay, apart from taxing, okay, and apart from debt finance. As we know, those don't really pay for anything. Okay, and actually, the $1 trillion coin would not pay for anything either. Things are always paid for in the same way. The Federal Reserve adds to the reserves in the Treasury spending account, and then the Treasury spends. It's the Treasury that has the fiscal power. Anyway, Democrats now have another opportunity to advance parts of their agenda the Republicans would otherwise block, and the decision to push for a workaround shows how limited Democrats' other options are to pass their agenda. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here I must cover. Okay, this goes into the filibuster again and points out how nice it could be if they were willing to eliminate the filibuster, if they could get Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on board. But the important thing is most of the other measures can't pass if they don't get rid of the filibuster. As 2022 approaches, there will be increasing pressure on Manchin and Sinema, okay, and other Democrats to get rid of the filibuster so those voting rights acts can be passed. Okay, because ultimately, the continuing power of Sinema and Manchin within the Democratic Party depends on the Democratic Party winning a majority in Congress. It does depend on that. Joe Manchin is the chairperson of the Energy Resource Committee right now. He would not be the chairperson of that committee if the Democrats lose in 2022. He'd still be the senator from West Virginia, but he wouldn't be the chairperson, okay, of that committee, and he wouldn't have the same degree of power. By pushing for a reinterpretation of Section 304 of the 1974 by Congressional Budget Act, the Democrats seem to be looking for other outlets for passing legislation if those in the caucus who are against eliminating the filibuster don't budge. Now they have one extra shot. As I pointed out, I think they have more than one extra shot. I think they have as many shots as they need. But here again, it may be even even though the parliamentarian agrees that they have an extra shot, if she sees them fixing to take a second shot, she might render some advice that even though the first shot was legitimate, the second shot is not, for some crazy reason that she's gonna come up with. But at that point, of course, and once again, I make this point, she is just an advisor, an employee of the Senate. The senators need not take her advice about what goes in a reconciliation bill. About what goes in a reconciliation bill is up to 50 senators plus one vice president. It is not up to the parliamentarian. And it is a very bad development for democratic government that because of all the BS that is floating around, people are beginning to talk about it as if it's the prerogative of the parliamentarian, okay, to determine what's going to go into a reconciliation bill. The only prerogative the parliamentarian has is to give advice. But the responsibility for whether or not they take bad advice is the responsibility of our representatives in the Senate and in the presidency. They're the ones responsible for the poor decisions, not the parliamentarian. Okay, here's another little passage from that article. Though no final decisions have been made on the process and how these plans will merge into a budget bill, but Democrats could theoretically break Biden's infrastructure plan and his forthcoming child care and health plan into two different reconciliation bills, sticking one in the amended 2021 resolution and putting the rest in the 2022 resolution. So here's where my suggestion comes in. They could have an amended 2021 resolution in April, and then in June or July, they could have another 2021 resolution. And in August, they could have another one. Who says they have to use the 2022 resolution at all until we get into 2022? They don't have to use that up. They can also have three or four rounds in 2022. And again, I want you to keep in mind, each round contains three possible reconciliation bills. One dealing with debt, one dealing with spending, and one dealing with taxation. And these idiots had better start to keep them separate, because the way they're doing it is not good strategy. There's another option. Democrats and Republicans could pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill that deals more narrowly with roads and bridges, and then Democrats in the Biden administration put their remaining priorities into a budget reconciliation bill. By relevant House and Senate committees are currently working on a surface transportation reauthorization bill, which comes up every 5 years. The 5-year reauthorization bills deal pretty narrowly with fixing up roads and bridges. And Republicans on the committees think the reauthorization bill should be worked on and passed in a bipartisan way. Oh, how nice. They want to pass stuff that they like in a bipartisan way, but the rest of it they just want to fight about and block completely using the filibuster. Anyway, Shelley Moore Capito, the other West Virginia senator, said, quote, "Our committee unanimously reported legislation to rebuild our nation's water systems. This proves that infrastructure can and should be done on a bipartisan basis," unquote. Yeah, like the way it's been done on a bipartisan basis up in Michigan, where the Republicans poisoned the water system for Flint. However, the White House views its plans as a supplement to whatever Congress does on infrastructure on its own. Biden has proposed $621 billion for spending on the nation's roads and bridges, rail and public transit, and airports and ports. So there's more on that. But the big news from here is there may be multiple shots in the reconciliation area, even before the end of this particular fiscal year, as far as we know at this point. That, in my view, is very, very big news. And I don't believe I have read anywhere else that anyone else has suggested there could be multiple shots, okay, of reconciliation without going beyond the 2021 reconciliation bill. So that's that. And that's my contribution for tonight. I will now turn to yours. Hope that wasn't too wonky for you.
I want every Democrat to say they want at least $20 an hour.
Bonnie says she wants every Democrat to say they want a minimum wage of at least $20 an hour.
And I won't take any less.
And Bonnie won't take any less. What I have to say about that is, if the progressives in the House were smart, what they would do is forget the minimum wage bill. Forget it. Just include, as part of the infrastructure bill, Ayanna Pressley's job guarantee legislation that she proposed, and pass the federal job guarantee at a living wage, a cost-adjusted living wage across the United States. If that gets passed, that is a de facto minimum wage for the whole country. Because if any corporation or business doesn't want to pay that minimum wage, in fact, doesn't want to exceed that particular minimum wage, they won't be able to get any employees. They won't be able to find anybody to work for them. Because why should anybody work for them when they can get a living wage by going to the job guarantee program? And that will always be there for them. So that is a de facto minimum wage, and it is superior to having a minimum wage bill. So the way the progressives should hit back at what was just done to them in the House is to get behind including Pressley's bill in the current infrastructure reconciliation round. And by the way, the parliamentarian won't be able to do anything about that because that's about federal spending. The federal government will be paying the minimum wage. I should say the de facto minimum wage will be getting paid by the federal government under the job guarantee. So the parliamentarian would have nothing to say about that. Obviously, it can be included in the infrastructure bill. Also because lots of those job guaranteed jobs, but probably most of them, are going to be jobs in the care economy, which are severely underpaid now and in which people sorely need a living wage as the minimum wage in the areas they work on. So, anyway, Kay says, thank you, Evelina. Diaz says, corporations and industries cannot make profits with long COVID workers, and it's coming back full force. But Medicare for all will be needed more than ever. I hope so. I read they've just discovered a new variant with 17 mutations in Brazil. Well, I think each of the mutations is a variant, isn't it? Paquet says Brazil is a mess. Diaz says fascists are devastating to people's health, okay, and the planet. Yeah, fascism is a death cult. That's what it is. Evelina Pont, the danger in Brazil is that the military may use this as a pretext to take over the government via coup d'etat. Evelina says, ultra right-wing military. Yeah, they are ultra right-wing. But they became very upset with Bolsonaro. They didn't like his right-wing stuff. Evelina says, exotic Brazilian wood imported by the United States, which you can actually purchase. I'll look it up. Evelina says, for floors, what does that say? But shouldn't there be a ban? Yeah, maybe there's COVID in the floors. Yeah, maybe coronavirus is in those floors. Dia says, I'm joking about that, I think. But Dia says, looks like the U.S. military is coming out with another vaccine too. Kay says, I've been hearing about the bamboo flooring for many years. Probably should be investigated. Kay says, I saw a post that Bill Gates is working on more nukes. Shake my head. No way. Bill Gates is working on nukes? What does Bill Gates have to do with nukes? Kay says, Michael Mann, climate scientist, says 2030, Kay, is the date. For net zero, right, Kay?
Maybe two.
Carmen says, so have someone produce solar-powered portable battery packs for the electric cars. Evelina says, electric vehicles are expensive. As it is, they are a status symbol. Well, they're not really being mass-produced right now. The prices will get a lot cheaper. Over the next 5 years, they're going to get a lot cheaper. And Evelina says, Bolivia introduced the first electric car prototype in the region near the end of Evo's government. Evelina says there have been setbacks for obvious reasons. Kay says we need vehicles with solar panels on them so they charge while driving. There are other solutions as well, specifically solar roads that can charge cars as one is driving on the roads. Carmen says, I don't see how electric cars are much better than fossil fuel running cars. Oh yeah, they're a lot more economical.
Quieter.
Yes, and much quieter. But the point is that as long as the power that is going to the electric cars is coming from power stations that are fueled by renewables, then electric cars are much, much, much better than fossil fuel running cars. Carmen says, that blazer looks like a velveteen. Did it? I didn't notice that. And Carmen says, why don't Manchin just switch parties and fly his fascist flag? Kay says, Manchin needs to go now. Dia says, Biden needs to put Manchin and Sinema in check. And Amber says, good evening, my lovelies. Good evening, Amber. Evelina says, the concept of a patriot has been so distorted, it appears to no longer exist. But much less materialized. People like Manchin are evidence of this. Kay says, our politics are so corrupt. I have little hope of being able to fix it. Shake my head. And Evelina says, the Senate looking like House of Lords. Laugh out loud. I think actually it looks like the Polish Diet of the 1790s that led to the second and third partitions, of Poland, because they couldn't pass any bills to take action against the Allies that were about to indulge in the second and third partitions, of Poland, and extinguish, its independence for 123 years. Kay says, Evelina, it works. We had a repair guy come to our house years ago, and he had a solar panel on his truck to power his tools. Evelina says, how cool. Yes, it can be done. Steve Gonzo says, Amazon privately pressured USPS to install an illegal ballot drop boxes during the union election. Amazon warehouse workers in Bessemer, Alabama, are voting overwhelmingly against forming a union. As tallying paused for the night, 1,100 employees had voted against unionization compared with 463 in favor. That is terrible news. Evelina says, you kidding me? Amazon has a good friend at the USPS still, since Biden hasn't gotten his horn out. Kay says he hasn't fired the asses at SSA either. Finally got my 1,400, so I have to go draw most of it out so that I don't get screwed on Medicaid again. Shake my head. Now, we received our stimulus checks also, or our stimulus payments. They weren't in the form of checks. Dia says, I'm perfectly cheeky with Manchin and Sinema getting kicked out. And Evelina says, which is why we need Dr. Joe for parliamentarian. Dia Swift says, no, Doc, only the donkey is wonky, too soft. Kay says, FJG is a very good idea. Yeah, it's a very good idea for setting the minimum wage. It's the best way to set the minimum wage, because that's the way it could be included in a reconciliation bill without any dispute. Kay says, every worker needs a living wage. Dia says, I read there are at least 12 Bavarians right now. Wow. Pangolians are the COVID originators. Hope their poo isn't in that Brazilian flooring. That's funny. That's funny. Okay, so spread the word. Start tweeting it around. If the Democrats want to pass a minimum wage, the way to do it is to get behind Presley's bill and pass that as part of the infrastructure bill. That will do it. That will take care of a minimum wage set at a living wage. And if they do it right, cost adjusted across the country according to local CPIs. That's what we want. So tweet that everywhere. Tweet that everywhere. And note, there were a few new ideas here in this particular stream. All those in favor of new ideas, raise their hands. Bonnie raises both hands. Okay, folks, I've reached the end. I'm going to say goodnight. I'll see you on Saturday. Have a good day tomorrow and have a good day on Saturday. Come back on Saturday, and I'll try my best to have some new ideas on Saturday, too. Anyway, good night. And Kay has raised her hands and said, I love you all. And we say, we love you, Kay. And Dolores says, thank you and good night, all. And thank you, Dolores. And Bonnie's gotten up, and you can see her flashing in the background. Evelyn says, goody on good ideas, laugh out loud. Lana says, good night. So, Lana, you're going to tweet out these ideas? Okay, good night, folks.